Good morning. Thank you so much for being here on a beautiful Saturday morning. I see a lot of brown and gold. I guess that means some folks are headed over the mountain, which is great. And I have to tell you, starting this event out, it's really gratifying to see young kids playing in the water in the fountain. That talk about connecting the past to the present. Well, my name is Milward Simpson. I'm the current chair of the Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board. I'd like to welcome you all here, and thanks for you being here. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge all of the folks who made this, all of this work possible, and some of our very special guests here today. So I'd like to introduce our Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board, Josh Chrysler, Amber Conwell, Patrick Bustos, Don Herrold, Gary Sims, Kathy Tabor Douglas, David Benner, Max Carr, I think Libby Bales. Most of them are here. Please raise your hand if you're a member of the Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board. And here at our newly dedicated Airport Fountain Park, we'll want to take this time to acknowledge the City Council for its support. I think we have Richard Johnson here representing the council today. And are there other council people here for me to acknowledge? Okay. Let's thank the City Council for all of their support of this project. Do I have any Laramie County Commissioners here? If so, would you raise your hand so I can acknowledge you? Okay, I know we have at least one state legislator here, Bill Henderson. Thank you, Bill, for your support. A lot of the funding for this project comes from state agencies, and Bill is a big part of approving their budget. So we appreciate the support of the Wyoming State Legislature, so thank you very much. We have Megan Stanfill here. She's the Executive Director of the Alliance for Historic Wyoming. They do tremendous work to support history in the state. Megan, thanks for being here. So we hope that as this whole area flourishes, that it becomes a big part of visitation and tourism to Cheyenne, and so we're very happy to have Dominic Bravo. He's the CEO of Visit Cheyenne here today. And of course, you're going to meet the Arts Cheyenne Board of Directors when we head over to the open house, and I'll be introducing Bill here shortly. Are there members of the airport board here at the celebration? Not yet, but please say hello to those folks when you go over for the open house. The work on this project goes back so far that I invited some folks who are no longer on our board, but were here during a lot of the work, and I think C.J. Young is here. Thanks for being here and coming back to see the results of all of your efforts. And now I want to turn my attention and thank the funders. We have some very, very important organizations that provided the funding to restore this fountain. And I'd like to introduce Renee Beauvais and thank her. She is the director of the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund. These very significant funds for this project. This project also wouldn't have been possible without the support of the State Historic Preservation Office and the CLG coordinator. Cheyenne's Historic Preservation Board is a certified local government that receives funds to do historic preservation work. I don't know if she was able to make it, but Katie Leeper of Brian Beatles. Katie's here. Great. Thanks, Katie. We also had some grant funds from the Women's Civic League. Is anyone here representing the Civic League? There's a few of them. All right, so what is the Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board? What is our job? I'm going to read just a little bit from the ordinance that establishes us. It is declared a matter of public policy that the protection, enhancement, and perpetuation of areas, improvements, and landscape features having historic character or special historical aesthetic interest or value is a public necessity and is required in the interest of the people. And so that's why we exist. And our job, and I'll quote again, is to accomplish the protection, enhancement, and perpetuation of historic areas, buildings, structures, or other features that reflect elements of the city's cultural, social, and economic, political, and architectural history. And so we work across the board to help conserve and preserve, celebrate, raise awareness about Cheyenne's history. That's what your Historic Preservation Board does. And to a person, we're all very proud to have the opportunity to serve in that capacity. So I'd like to talk a little bit about aviation history. I'll tell you, before I joined this board, I didn't know just how prominent that history is and how important Cheyenne's aviation history is. Well, while researching the story behind the airport fountain, there's a postcard that we found with an aerial view of the airport about 1940, and the caption on the other side of that card kind of says it all about the significance of this area. This is the quote from that card. Cheyenne's great airport is one of the highest rated and most important air stations in America. Constantly being enlarged and improved, it handles great numbers of mail and passenger planes daily. So in its heyday, Cheyenne was home to a main transcontinental aviation hub, one of the busiest in the United States. And indeed, such pioneers as Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh did visit this airport. There's a great historic picture you'll see at the terminal of the Spirit of St. Louis when it was here. So this all kind of began with the advent of airmail. So in 1920, the Postal Service started experimenting with airmail delivery by plane. And because planes were limited in altitude, the route of these planes normally followed the railroad, which is why, you know, this area served as it's such an important hub for airmail, and specifically between Omaha and Salt Lake, and that was kind of the airmail route. In the late 20s, Boeing established their main maintenance facility right here, which is one of the largest in the country, and then they added passenger service to the route, and you're going to hear more about what it was like to actually fly commercial aviation back in the day. So the fountain itself, the city was proud of the city's important role in aviation and wanted to beautify the airport entrance and the facilities. So this fountain was commissioned by the city in the 1930s as part of this larger beautification project. And this was kind of an anchor of a whole esplanade that was kind of a walkway that characterized the airport at that time. So this is a beautiful terracotta structure. It was built by the Denver Terracotta Company. It cost a whopping $1,420. It was completed in 1935. These are Art Deco features and bas-relief images of a plane flying through the clouds. We believe that is a DC-247. Is that correct, Don? You got that right? Okay. A Boeing 237. And they did much of their modifications to the B-17 bomb right here. You lost me again. I'm going to talk really loud and hope it comes back on. So the airport history kind of reached its peak during World War II. And then kind of when... hold on, are we back yet? All right, so the airport fountain stands as a witness to all of this history, and we hope the restoration will serve to remind future generations of Cheyenne's glorious past for aviation history. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the Historic Preservation Board's involvement in getting this done, because it was such a multiple-year effort. So we weren't sure how long this fountain had been in complete disrepair and wasn't functioning. But it was in a bad state of repair for many, many decades, and all of the terracotta and the bas-relief was chipped off. The tiles were kind of destroyed. The electronics wouldn't work. So it was about 2009 that we decided to actually get involved with this. So that's how far the board's involvement goes back. Well, thank you. We're getting applause for that. That's good. So we had a account that was set up in 2017 to kind of hold funds that we raised for this. So there were two phases. There was phase one, which was the restoration of the fountain bowl itself, mainly the lining to help with waterproofing. We updated the electrical and the lighting, and we had a celebration back in 2020 to celebrate the completion of phase one.
You might try it over here, Milward.
I have the feeling we'd be bouncing back and forth. So, phase two was the actual restoration of the terracotta, which was reconstructing the damaged bas-relief motifs, restoring the blocks, and we're going to hear more about that from one of the masons who worked on it. Last April, the city council passed a resolution naming this little section Airport Fountain Park. So you are now in the city's newest park, Airport Fountain Park. So we received grants in the amount of between $12,000 and $25,000. It's very important to point out that we actually raised a lot of our own money as well. And I'm going to ask Gary Sims to talk briefly about that. He was kind of the private fundraising powerhouse. But all told, and this is a big deal for a volunteer board in a city like this, the amount of money that was raised from the funders we acknowledged earlier and from our own work is $132,684 to get this whole project. All right, I'm going to introduce Gary. Gary's going to talk briefly about a lot of you are familiar with these beautiful ornaments. Go ahead, Gary.
What I'm really going to do is give you a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to generate money to put this together.
Closer to the mic, please. We can't hear you.
The first time we got an estimate to get this fixed, it was so high that our board was on pace to finish this in 87 years, and that's without inflation. So at some point we decided it was time to get serious, so we were looking at ways to generate money to get this going. And one of the bright ideas I had, well, let's have a scrap metal drive. So my wife and I picked up 19 tons of scrap metal, and between 2 and 4 cents a pound to put towards this effort here. And one of my favorite stories is I was going out to a house to pick up some metal in Western Hills, and I thought, this is going to be absolutely great. I'm in the rich section of town, big house. Lady comes to the door and she goes, I want to help you guys out. I'll be back. And here I'm thinking she's going to bring us gold coins. She comes back and hands me 7 wire hangers. So that was the end of that story. So at that point I was pushing over 70 and I thought, we got to find a new way. So we developed these ornaments, and I put back some just for this occasion. And I have them over here for sale. But ornaments, we do a historic building every year. Been a great success. And this one we have here for the fountain. I want you to go over and look at it. On the back of it, I have an original tile that we took off here during the original renovation. So please come by and take a look at those. And those of you that bought the ornaments, thank you.
All right. Just want to mention that it took a lot of fortitude to get this done and stick with this project. And Jerry's going to talk a little bit later, Jerry Berggren. When we got the estimate of the total cost of this project in 2017, there was a poll done through the Cheyenne Tribune-Eagle that said that we should probably just return all the money and give up on the project, because it seemed like it was really daunting. But the board didn't give up, and we did everything we could do to raise money, and here we are. And I'd like to mention also that none of this would have been possible without the constant support of the city planning staff. I don't think Charles was able to be here. I know Seth is here, and Lonnie Olson. We really rely on these great city employees. So here we are today. We're celebrating the completion of this several-year project going back to 2009, and some of the future plans for this park. We're going to try to do some historic interpretive signage to talk about some of the people who figured in this history. People like Ellen Church. She was one of the first stewardesses when commercial aviation started. This airport was home to the first stewardess school, and it operated clear till 1961. So really, commercial aviation probably would not have happened without this city, this airport, and our important role in aviation history. So I'd like to introduce now another speaker. I hope he has really loud pipes. Okay, Donnie, you are next. Folks, this is Don Herrold on our board, and he's going to talk a little bit about what it was like to fly.
Yeah, as Milward mentioned, the city was very proud of its role in aviation in wanted to, even in the depths of the Depression, wanted to celebrate and decorate the entrance to the terminal, which of course is right there. But I was curious, you know, for the people that got on and off the plane, what was flying like in the 1930s? It was very different than we find today. Most people still rode trains and buses because flying was so expensive.
As I was saying, flying was quite expensive during that time. To give you some idea, coast-to-coast round trip from Newark to San Francisco was $260. Sounds like a deal, right? Well, $260 in today's money equals $5,700 in 1936. So that's about half the cost of the average automobile at the time. So there wasn't a lot of public traffic. It was businessmen who found a transcontinental trip would save them lots of money, and then just celebrities and other people that just had a lot of money to spend. There was still a healthy market for this. Only 6,000 Americans traveled commercially by airplane in all of 1930, according to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. 4 years later, that number would multiply by 75 times, 450,000 passengers by 1934. What experience was shared by these travelers? Well, there were no crowds at the airport, like we see today, and no TSA. For example, the Boeing 247, which is the plane that's featured on the bas-relief here, and was in the early 30s was the primary vehicle for these flights. There wouldn't be anybody. The plane held only 10 passengers. You didn't have to worry about who you were sitting next to. There were 2 rows of 5 seats with an aisle down the middle, so you had your own personal seat the whole time. One note about the aisle: there was a wing spar that came up about 2 feet in the middle of the aisle, about 4th row back, and even ladies in skirts and high heels had to get over it. And they did dress. They dressed in the nines back then. It was considered similar to an ocean voyage. So you put on your best to make that trip. As you prepare for takeoff, a sign was illuminated advising no smoking. If you were nervous and needed that cigarette to calm your nerves, don't worry. Once in the air, the sign went off and you could smoke to your heart's content or your heart's damage, whatever. You could recline in your seat and relax in the thermostatically controlled, air-conditioned, and sound-deadened cabin. Stewardesses even had cigarettes available if you forgot yours. Yes, there were stewardesses aboard to take care of your every need. Although it wasn't publicized, the original stewardesses were also trained nurses. So they were available to assist with any upset that might be caused by the buffeting of the small plane or other minor emergencies. If you were hungry, the stewardess offered sandwiches and salads on board. The crew was augmented with a co-pilot, which was a new feature for the 247. And last but pretty important, for your comfort, there was a bathroom in the back of the plane. Your coast-to-coast flight from New York was not non-stop. There were landings in Cleveland, Chicago, Omaha, Cheyenne, and Salt Lake City before you reached your destination in San Francisco. Cruising at 200 miles per hour at an altitude of about 13,000 feet, the longest of these hops was 3 hours. But the big attraction to this type of transportation was the whole trip took only a groundbreaking 20 hours. Unfortunately, early passenger aviation was not without disasters. Front page of the Wyoming State Tribune, October 7th, 1935, read, 12 die when airliner hits ground 10 miles west of the city. It was one of our 247s. Interesting background on that unfortunate flight. Former President Herbert Hoover had booked a seat on the flight just in case his speech went over time and he missed his train. He made the train, so he wasn't on the plane, luckily. He could have been, though. George H. Minor, meanwhile, who patented the first pinball machine, was on the flight, as was Juliet Hillman of Pittsburgh, whose father, Henry Hillman, was head of the Pittsburgh Coke and Chemical Plant. Aboard the plane was a last-minute passenger, one who had boarded too quickly for his identity to be confirmed. That mystery passenger is likely one Robert H. Rennebaum. Interestingly, he was on the run from the law for embezzling charges. Crash investigators later found Rennebaum was carrying someone else's ticket. So there's quite a story. The ticket had been sold to Walter Crandall with the Associated Oil Company. Strangely, Crandall wasn't among the bodies identified investigators after the crash. Crandall, it turned out, had boarded a Standard Oil plane that was declared missing after never arriving at its destination in San Francisco. It was a bad day to fly. Sounds like you'd make a mystery movie except for the sad ending.
In closing, I hope I've added to your appreciation of the significance of Cheyenne's aviation history. Restoration and preservation of this fountain will serve as a reminder to us and to future generations of that proud legacy. Thank you.
I mentioned Ellen Church, and thank you, Don. That was great. She, in 1930, was a registered nurse and a licensed pilot who helped convince airline executives to allow women to work in the commercial airline industry as stewardesses. And part of her argument was who better than nurses to put fearful passengers at ease, and who better than women to show men it was safe to fly. Or as she put it, don't you think that it would be good psychologically to have women up in the air? How is a man going to say he's afraid to fly when a woman is working on the plane? The work itself was much more than pouring drinks and looking pretty. It was cleaning the cabin, fueling the planes, bolting down the seats before takeoff. And while they normally drew on their medical training only minimally in assisting airsick or panicked passengers, they occasionally played the part of first responders in an emergency. The first flights used 8 stewardesses and flew from San Francisco to Cheyenne. That's also part of our history. All right, I would like to introduce next Jerry Berggren. He's going to talk a little bit about the restoration project. Wonderful architect, Jerry. The mic is yours.
When I started to research what I really should be talking about today, there were a lot of people that needed to be mentioned, and bear with us as mentioned most of them. But there's a couple that he either didn't know about or, but I'm going to fill in the blanks. We got involved with this. I'm a Nebraska citizen, please don't hold that against me. We were out here as consultants for the state capitol. Mike Dixon, who is the main reason that I'm standing here, was our consultant, our preservation architect. I was literally living here in Cheyenne for 3 years. And Mike and I have both served on our respective preservation boards. While Mike was here, he attended every one of the preservation board meetings, and it was through Mike's introduction to me as somebody who knew something about terracotta, and the rest is somewhat history. The other people that I think are very important to mention were city staff. My main contact was Stephanie Lowe, and she's not with the city anymore. She's with the Wyoming Department of Transportation, I believe. She carried pretty much everything that I needed and the fountain needed. She was the conduit from our end of it to the board, and then on to the contractors as they were hired. She was through phase one and left to go to the Department of Transportation. Samantha, what's your last name? Crowley, thank you. She followed and pretty much got the fountain almost done, and Lonnie came in as she moved to I don't know where. Rumor has it she's in New Orleans. But those individuals really deserve some credit for getting us to where we're at. Merwith mentioned the importance of the aviation to Cheyenne and vice versa, and how the fountain was originally dedicated. As an architect, I think of things in terms of design. One of the things he didn't mention is the form of the fountain. The tower portion is to replicate the beacons that those airmail pilots followed across that route. This is predating radio signals, and it was a visual landmark to keep them on course. So it's not just a haphazard design, it has some history of its own. He mentioned also the report that was produced in 2009. It was done by Clayton Frazier out of Colorado. It was a very detailed report, and it also helped us because he had gone to the trouble to do original measured drawings, saving us some time. And the other part of it, you've heard these comments about the estimates. We shocked everybody, not intentionally, but just truthfully. The large number that was out there was over $300,000, and that anticipated replacing most, if not all, of the terracotta. And that's why that was so much higher than what it turned out. The other estimate was around I think it was 160-some thousand, which was a little more palatable, but still well beyond what they thought they could do. I appreciate the board's fortitude in carrying this forward. The fundraising that they had to do, they worked with us, or we worked with them more correctly, because we had laid out a proposal. We'd done the cost estimate. That was the first job we were hired to do, and then we were hired to do the drawings and specifications for the craftsmen to come in and do the rest of the work, or do the physical work. We had recommended, I think it was a 5 or 6 point process that ended with turning on the fountain and having this celebration. The grant that Stephanie had gotten or told me about stipulated that the fountain had to be running after the first phase. And you've already heard that the terracotta restoration was done afterwards. Well, water and terracotta don't like it. Well, water wins eventually. And especially with the terracotta having spalls, it was deteriorating. If you turn it on, it was deteriorating pretty fast. So yes, it ran, and I don't think it ran more than about 2 or 3 times before the restoration of the terracotta started. We had done so much work in the first phase, design work, and through Stephanie, we got we got 4 pieces of new terracotta. There were 3 that were missing. We removed 1 as pattern and sent it to Gladding McBean in California to replicate. The board decided that rather than bring that one back, they could take that one, break it apart so they could do color matching. And so now we needed 4. And the bill at Gladding McBean was just shy of $10,000 for the mold and the 4 pieces and the shipping to get it back here. The shipping back and forth, Mike Dixon was still here in Cheyenne, and he worked with Stephanie. They got it all crated, and that was taken care of. The color samples were done on tiles, clay tiles. They were matched to the piece in not San Francisco, but California. And they looked good photographically, but then they ultimately were sent here to be compared to the actual tile, the terracotta that exists here. So we got through phase 1, we were ready to go with phase 2. We had the pieces, then it became the point, who's going to be able to do this? Reglazing terracotta, first of all, it's a slight misnomer. To glaze means to fire. Well, this wasn't fire. This was a glazing that is, you might think of it as paint, but it's an incredibly special paint. It takes years of practice and training to be able to do just simple glazing, a smooth surface. We've had people in Nebraska that have done flat surfaces, not this model color that you have. So finding the right craftsman was a huge challenge, and we did. I'm not quite sure how that came about, but I'd like to introduce Mike Madone, who is the mason that got the contract, and let him talk a little bit about the process of literally bringing this fountain back to what you see today. Mike?
Yeah, my name is Mike Madone. Company is Mountain Masonry. We're based in Colorado. And to be honest, I'd never been past the fireworks stands in Cheyenne until this project, and since then I've truly fallen in love with Cheyenne. This was a very fun project to work on. Definitely challenging. Typically when we start repairing terracotta, we start with Dremel tools and small grinders to dig away anything that's soft or rotten. We started doing that on this project, and soon realized there was a lot of algae that was growing behind the glaze, and it was worse than we initially thought. So we ended up getting a pressure washer to start cleaning it, and with that we discovered areas where it looked like the piece was totally fine, but you hit it with the pressure washer and the glaze would just explode off of it, and there'd be green algae behind it. So we cleaned it really good. Even got some algicide and coated everything with algicide before we started the repairs. Once you have the rotten material, the soft material ground out, use a series of patching compounds. For thicker spots, it's a custom 45 Edison. Custom 45 Edison coatings product that's anywhere from a 1/4 inch thick up to a 1/2 inch. On top of that, you put it's a thin fill, and that's mostly what we use on this project. And it kind of goes on like peanut butter. You want to try to get it to be as close as possible to the final surface, but you do end up having to grind on it and sand it. A lot of the clouds and the airplanes, there were chunks missing out of those, and we're able to rebuild those back up and sand them down and shape them to get them to where they are now. And then the glaze replication, it was a 3-color process. The first one goes on solid, and then use a seafoam sponges to get that to match the glaze effect of the original pieces. And once that's all done, it gets a clear coat. There were 2 versions of those products. Up in the inner part of the fountain, they're almost like a 2-part epoxy where you have to mix the materials together and coat them, and they set up pretty quick. But where it's more in the water, it required a more sturdy material. Really fun project to be involved in. I was very happy that I could come back today, kind of last minute, but yeah, very happy to be involved with this.
So as you can tell, a lot went into this. Very, very detailed, precise work, and a lot of effort, really a labor of love on behalf of so many people. I'm sure if you have more questions about the process, you can talk to Mike or talk to Jerry. But I think what might be fun is to ask everybody to participate in a countdown to turn on the fountain. How about that? Okay, well I will tell you that there's no wind blowing right now, but you might get just a little sprinkle, I don't know. Right before we do that, because we had this tremendous partnership with Art Cheyenne, we're going to be heading over after we eat some cake and just celebrate, heading over to the open house. I'm going to give the executive director of Art Cheyenne a couple of minutes to talk about what the open house is all about, and then we will do our countdown. Bill? Oh, okay. All right, not Bill, Mike. All right, this is Mike Morris, folks.
Hey, thank you all so much for coming out today, and certainly I think I don't have to go out on a limb that we're all getting our vitamin D being out here on this beautiful morning. A big thank you again to everyone who's been involved in this restoration project, from the Historic Preservation Board to the airport, to the city and city council members, to all the folks who performed the renovations. This is going to be a special moment for Cheyenne. I'm up here to talk about an exciting additional project that really is forward-looking, and it's something that if you'll wander over to the airport terminal behind me after the fountain dedication is complete, you can certainly learn more about this project. Just very briefly, a bit of background on Arts Cheyenne. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that undertakes arts planning and coordination here in the city of Cheyenne and really in Laramie County as a whole. We undertake a lot of coordination and maintenance of public art. We help with the planning of events, I should say, like the Cheyenne Art Celebration that took place in Lions Park about a month ago. We have the Cheyenne Creativity Center downtown, the Cheyenne Art House, which is parked out in front of the old airport terminal, and a number of other undertakings as well. We have a small staff that's led by our wonderful executive director, Bill Lindstrom. Everyone on the staff is wonderful, and then we have also a volunteer board of directors. And so I just have some brief remarks about this exciting project that's forthcoming. So a few months back, Arts Cheyenne received a $50,000 National Endowment for the Arts, Our Town grant to reimagine and design an arts and culture presence in the old Cheyenne Airport Terminal. And the project has now been branded the Arts and Aviation Center, and it will encompass an arts and culture section, an aviation history section, and a food and beverage and public event section. So it's really bringing vitality back to that structure once again, and turning it into a public gathering space essentially. And so we would love the public's help to imagine the possibilities for this great facility, to provide your ideas to the Arts and Aviation Center design, and to help develop a path forward for reactivating this historic and wonderful structure. And so at the completion of this fountain dedication, please join us for self-guided tours of the terminal, including connecting with Arts Cheyenne staff, the Historic Preservation Board, and airport staff to talk about the terminal's history and a little bit about what the possibilities may entail in the future. And then we would also be very grateful if you fill out the 2-minute survey that is in the building so that you can participate in helping us define the future of the Arts and Aviation Center. So once again, a really exciting project full of possibility to bring life back into that structure. And now let's celebrate bringing life back to this fountain. Thank you.
Also food there, folks. Food truck. Really good stuff. So we got food as well. Also, I've been noticing that some old historic planes have been wheeled up. You can actually go outside and look at some historic planes as well. All right, so we have a sheet cake for those of you who would like to have a little piece of cake with us to celebrate. And Gary has his ornaments over here, and we're going to go ahead and do our countdown. I'm going to ask if these kids would like to help. Would any of you kids like to help with our 10-second countdown? Well, why don't you come on over?
Willard, I just wondered about the P.S. Cook family history and support of this fountain. They did a lot of work many years ago to bring it back once or twice. When it was still functioning.
How many of you remember the P.S. Cook family? Well, let's acknowledge them. They clearly played a very important role in this fountain as well. Thank you for that. Okay, here we go.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6,
Thanks, kids. All right, please enjoy the open house. Have some cake if you'd like, and enjoy this beautiful day. Thanks again for coming.